Hello and welcome to today's video where we're going to be talking about being a person who cares. Being a person who has fucks to give, who actually does care about other people, cares about what's happening in the world, is affected by the people around you and the relationships you're in and the people you're in relationship with and all of these things, and how to navigate this in a healthy way. Because I feel like right now there is more and more and more of a swing in our culture towards hyper individualism and this messaging that we are supposed to transcend being bothered by things. That we are supposed to not care, that we are supposed to not care what people think about us, that we're not supposed to care about things that are outside of our control, that having empathy is somehow wrong or weak. Like literally there are books being written about how empathy is toxic and compassion is something that we need to avoid because it's bad and wrong and taking us in the wrong direction. And this is obviously, in my opinion, the exact opposite of the message that I'm trying to send here and the work that we're doing here. And I believe it is also the exact opposite thing we need as a humanity to move towards what we want, which is we are looking for a world that works better for all of us. And I believe that at its core, the reason why people are saying that we need to, stay in our own lane, stop caring so much about the outside world, stop caring about what people think about you, stop being a people pleaser, stop having empathy, stop all of this stuff. They're people who are deeply confused about why they may be experiencing pain in their lives, why they may be feeling discomfort and discontent, and they are reaching for solutions that are not solutions but that appear like solutions on the surface. Okay, so in this video, I want to speak to the kind of trend that we're seeing in certain spaces, certain political spaces, certain religious spaces especially, and spirituality spaces and self-help spaces that are telling us that empathy is toxic, that caring too much about how people feel, especially people who are deeply different than us, is bad and wrong. And there are many reasons why we are being told that this is the case. Okay, so on the one hand, in like the kind of spirituality, self-help, personal growth world spaces, we're being told we need to care less and have less empathy and stay in our lane and not be so bothered by people and things, because many of us struggle with dealing with our empathy, right? We get overwhelmed by all the tragedy that's happening on the planet. We get overwhelmed by all of the things that are happening. And as a way of trying to separate ourselves from those deeply uncomfortable emotions and the really hard reality that tragic things happen and that there are acts of nature and acts of the body and things that happen that are totally outside of our control, that we cannot control, that happen to people. And witnessing that can be really heart-wrenching and painful when you're empathetic and when you're compassionate towards others. And it can lead to a kind of existential crisis in ourselves where we're realizing that the scary things that happen to other people, the tragedies, the losses, And so I was saying the acts of nature that happen that are outside of our control, the acts of the body that happen that are outside of our control, the things our governments do that are outside of our control. Like, we exist in a world where we simply do not have perfect control over our lives. And so when we watch tragedy with others, that can be, again, a source of internal conflict and internal pain, both because we are empathizing with and feeling bad for, in a natural, normal human way, people who we are watching that are going through hard things that we can't help and we can't really do anything about, or the help we can give seems so small, and dealing with those deeply uncomfortable emotions while also dealing with the deeply uncomfortable existential crisis that comes from watching other people go through hard things that are outside of their control, and having that lead us to recognizing and realizing that those things can happen to us too. And then that's scary, right? That we don't want to believe that. And so a lot of the time in the spirituality world, we're being taught that, these people manifested that they asked for it on some level, that it's their vibration, that they're making bad choices in their lives, like, right, especially in the health and wellness area, that when people get sick, when they get cancer, when they have lifelong disease, chronic illness, all of these things that we legitimately just don't have perfect answers for, the spirituality and self-help world want to come in and say, don't worry. Number one, you don't have to have compassion for them. And you don't have to deal with feeling like that's scary and that might happen to you too. Because if you make all the right choices, and if you do all the right things, and if you make sure your vibration is high and your diet is perfect and all of this, you can avoid ever getting sick. You can avoid ever manifesting an earthquake. You can avoid whatever. And we can sometimes want to believe that because, again, it helps to absolve that deep existential reality that we can look out onto the world and just see that it isn't fair. We can see that it just isn't fair. That horrible things happen to people, and people who don't deserve it. And that amazing things happen to people that don't deserve it. And there are a lot of just seemingly chaotic things that happen on this planet that lead to hard things and tragedy and death and loss and suffering. And we don't have control over it, right? So in the spirituality, self-help, personal growth world, we kind of have to remember that this message of just stop caring is seated in the manifestation talk. It's seated in the wellness world that tells you that you could heal and fix and change everything by perfecting your life and perfecting your choices. That we can manifest, that everything is a result of our vibration. So if you perfect your vibration and perfect your emotions and all of this stuff, you'll manifest only good things. And therefore, those who are suffering, they're suffering from their own fault. Yeah? That we have to make sure that we're really listening to the undertone of these messages and what is really being said if we follow it all the way through. Okay? And then in more kind of conservative religious spaces, there is a lot of talk about how empathy is bad because we are moving in a direction in culture where we are starting to recognize that, again, society has been set up to be unfair. That society has been set up to be against the rights of people who are LGBTQ+, to be against the rights of people of certain races and skin colors, and to be against people who are chronically ill, to be against people who are not essentially, cis, straight, able-bodied, rich people. And what we are seeing in kind of conservative messages is like, whoa, 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 back up on this whole compassion thing, back up on this whole empathy thing. Because if we start having empathy for the people that we have been demonizing, right? Because again, a lot of the time in religious circles, and I'm not saying this about everyone, I'm not saying this about every religion, I am not saying this about everyone who is religious. This is absolutely not a universal truth, but it is a truth in a lot of spaces, that there is this idea that, like, if you are homosexual or not straight in any way, that you're evil. And so it's okay, therefore, for society to prejudice people who are in that category because we've written them off as evil. It's okay to judge poor people as having made bad decisions and they're criminals or they're whatever, and therefore we don't have to have empathy for them. Yeah? And they're saying, don't start to have empathy, because if we start to have empathy, we're going to start to recognize and realize where society is set up to take rights away from these people, to make them inherently unsafe in society by comparison to other people. And that power dynamic of making certain groups of people unsafe because we've seen them as evil, wrong, and bad is how the wealthy people and the people who have power in our society sustain and maintain that power. That if we were to start to have empathy, we would then have to start to say, okay, these people deserve rights, they deserve freedom, they deserve the same kind of opportunities, the same kind of support that everyone else is getting. And that would mean there's less to hoard for those who are in power right now. That's really the fear of empathy that's going on there. Do you see what I'm saying? That if we were to start to have empathy and we were to start to actually humanize these people, we would then have to say, okay, well, now they deserve rights. They deserve to be treated like human beings. They deserve social support and all of this stuff. And then all of a sudden, corporations and religions and governments can't use them as scapegoats, can't exploit them, and have culture just look at them and be like, yeah, well, they deserve that exploitation because they're less than human. That is the problem that we are seeing when people say, don't have empathy for these people. What they are really saying is, we need them to be exploited. We need them to be seen as less than human so that we can keep exploiting them for our own benefit and have culture agree to that because we see them as bad. We see them as less than human. If we were to become a society that functioned off actually caring, we could not continue on the way that we are. That is the big bottom line here. We could not continue on with corporations convincing us that the single thing that makes a human being worthwhile is what they contribute to the system and how hard you work and how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice for profiting those who are at the tops of corporations. And again, this understanding that especially in our society today, there is a huge level of invisible, at this point for most of us, classism that leads to so much of the harm that is happening, where again we are being told that the people who are struggling, people who are struggling to make ends meet, people who are not rich, people who are not successful, are that because of their own poor choices. They're lazy, they're criminals, they're whatever. And so much of the time, if we actually look into it, we're going to see that people have come from backgrounds of being poor. And we have studies that show that growing up in that kind of environment is so incredibly stressful. And it literally impacts the way that your brain is formed. It's a stress response that fully affects your capacity for the rest of your life. It diminishes your capacity. It diminishes your critical thinking skills. It diminishes your willingness and ability to find who you are and to find what you're good at and to explore passions and do all this stuff because you don't feel safe. And we notice that there are these communities that are like systemically under-resourced. They're undereducated. They don't have the same opportunities as people growing up in more rich families and parts of society. And that has a huge impact on the outcomes they're going to experience. And then a lot of the time we're going to notice that these, in the unfair distribution of access, resource, education, help is by design. Because that's how we have people who have so much more than they need, is because things are not being distributed equally and fairly. And rather than seeing the system for what it is, we're blaming the poor people for making bad choices. We're then convinced that social programs are enabling people to continue to be just lazy, when again, most of the time, this isn't reality. People just need education, they need support, they need empowerment, because that's what the wealthy people are getting. And they become great because they were supported. They don't become great just because they are great and everyone else is shitty. You see? So this idea that not having empathy for people is a healthy thing for us is rooted in a complete misunderstanding. It's rooted in this idea that we can get rid of our existential fear and our existential dread by believing that bad things only happen to people who deserve it on some level in the spirituality and self-help and wellness world. And it's also rooted in, we want to keep culture the way that it is, where we can continue to exploit groups of people because we have dehumanized them enough that the world looks at our dehumanization and exploitation and says that's okay. So we can continue to be rich and powerful and in control, and everyone else suffers and no one says anything about it. That's really what's behind these messages of stop caring. Stay in your own lane, work on yourself. If you just control your own self, if you just control your own mind, if you just control your own body, you can have the perfect life. That is what is underneath this don't have empathy thing. We need to recognize that the fact that our culture is being so deeply indoctrinated into hyper-individualism is the problem. It is not the solution. But it is being sold as the solution. It is being sold as the solution to existential dread, to fear, and again, there's this message that if you just take care of yourself enough and manifest enough and focus on yourself enough, You can become rich. You can become successful. That's how you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and create your perfect life, is by focusing on yourself and being in competition with everyone all the time and working your way up the ladder and all of these things. Okay, so hopefully that kind of paints a general picture of why we don't want to become people who don't care. We don't want to fall for the message that empathy is a bad thing, and that there are certain people we shouldn't empathize with, and that don't deserve empathy, and that empathy can be dangerous. No, that's not what it is. Okay, so what do we actually need? What's the actual solution? What should we be as conscious individuals who are saying we want a better planet? What should we be focusing on? Okay, well, number one, we all need tools for processing the existential reality that we are not completely in control of our lives, that we are going to watch other people suffer in ways that are tragic and horrible, that we can't necessarily do anything about, that are going to scare us and remind us that we are also vulnerable and don't have perfect control over our lives, and we need tools for actually working through that. Okay? So that is why I do this work. That is why I made the Mystery School. That's why I do coaching. That's why I make these videos. That's why I recommend Martha Beck's work. That's why I recommend you follow people who are actually preaching grounded spirituality. Because we are, for as long as we live, going to exist in a world where we do not have perfect control, where we are not able to say, I can prevent all tragedy. Right? So this does not mean that our choices don't matter. This isn't to say that we have no control. We want to get out of black and white thinking. We all have the skills and the power to do better for ourselves as we learn and as we grow. It is true that we can take care of our bodies and prevent illness. Yes, like this is objectively true. We know that our choices make a difference. We know that we can be responsible with our money, or we can be responsible in our work and in our careers, and we can do adult things that help us have more order and structure in our lives. We can learn how to communicate and have better relationships because of it. We can learn emotional regulation and have a better life in general because of it. This is not to say we have no control. We want to take the control we do have. We want to live lives where we are able to recognize where we do have control, where we do have power, right? Like it's the same idea that I work with people who are dealing with realizing that their upbringing was harmful to them, and realizing that now they have habits in their adulthood that they've been blaming and shaming themselves about for years and years and years, that are actually the result of not having been supported in their childhoods, right? And realizing and recognizing that that conditioning that they got, that they're not good enough, that they're not worthy of love, that they have to do this or do that and be this and be that, and suppress this and pretend to be that in order to be loved and in order to be safe. They have people-pleasing tendencies. They don't know how to process their emotions. And all of this stuff is having a massive impact on their adult life now. Realizing that, being able to grieve that and be upset that that is true and that it really did impact them, And now changing those habits and changing those things is gonna be hard because it's programmed in to be this way that's like based in your nervous system. And switching your perspective and seeing things from a new way and getting through your conditioning and all of this stuff is hard work. So being able to acknowledge and recognize that the pain we're in is not our fault, that we did not create it, we did not choose it, and that doesn't mean we have to be stuck in it for the rest of our lives. There are tools that we can use to help us shift out of those patterns, to help us see ourselves differently. And we just have to practice these tools over and over and over again. We have to practice self-compassion, self-curiosity, showing up for ourselves, processing negative emotions, learning to get mad at them instead of ourselves. All of these tools that we use, we can start to see, okay, yes, that happened, and yes, it had a major impact on me, and no, I didn't have any control over it, and that doesn't mean I'm totally powerless moving forward. I can decide what I'm going to do with it and how I'm going to handle it. And maybe I won't ever perfectly heal. Maybe I won't ever fully transcend. But I can do better and I can feel better and we can move in a positive direction and just see what happens. It's exactly that with life in general. It's being able to hold both of these truths at the same time. That we are not in full control. That tragedies are going to happen to us. Tragedies are going to happen to others. That we have no power over. That we did not choose. We are going to watch under-resourced communities go through a weather disaster. And people are going to be without resources. And they're going to get sick, and they're going to get hurt, and they're going to die, and it's going to be awful. And that is a real situation. And it's hard to watch. It's hard to see that. And then we can say, okay, do I have some extra resources to donate? Where can I pitch in as a community member? A member of the collective humanity? Do I have time I can offer? Do I have resources? Do I have education? Whatever it is. When hard things happen to the people that are close to us, when people that are close to us get sick, or go through a loss, or have a breakup, or whatever it is, we can learn how to be there for people. We can learn that a lot of the time, the difference between a hard thing that we grow through and a trauma that holds us back in life is the amount of support we had while we went through the hard thing. This is why we can't necessarily define something that's going to cause trauma and something that isn't, because it's how we experience that trauma, that adverse experience, that determines that. So can we learn to be people who are able to sit with and hold space for people who are going through hard things? To not be the kind of people who jump in with, well, here's what you can do about it, and here's how to problem solve and all that stuff. Because a lot of the time, when people are going through hard things, what they need is a safe space to be validated in how they're feeling first. They need a safe space to be heard, to be loved, to be supported, and to just be told that it's okay that they're upset. It's okay that they are going through this and it's not their fault. They don't need someone to tell them solutions right away. And they don't need someone to emotionally check out and run away because it's too hard. Right? The more we learn how to support and validate ourselves when we're going through hard things, the more we can then start to do that for other people who are going through hard things. So that brings me to my next point, is learning these tools for ourselves of facing the existential realities of life and being able to have tools to help us work through those things. Are you able to hold your own emotions? Are you able to be with your fear and to learn to watch it instead of being totally sucked in by it? Can you develop these tools of validating your anger, validating your sadness, validating your resentment, validating that some days you're going to feel hopeless or overwhelmed and scared, and making that okay? Because we know that emotions are going to shift and change. That the more we suppress them and deny them and try to get rid of it, the scarier and more painful they become. We can learn how to process our emotions. We can learn how to process our fears. We can learn how to process our overwhelm so that it doesn't overtake us. And then we don't have to live in a world where we have to deny that horrible things could happen to us and that horrible things happen to other people that we don't have control over. Or we don't have to live in constant fear of that stuff. Right? Because the reality is, you could walk outside right now and get hit by a car. Someone could just not see you when you're crossing the road, and that completely changes your life. Like, we are constantly at risk. Your government could decide to go fascist in any minute, and that's what it is. Like, this is reality. So how do we deal with that? That's why we develop these tools of self-compassion and empathy for ourselves and learning how to process. And then again, like I said, accepting that even within those horrible things that happen to us, we will have choices. That there will be things we can do to improve the situation. And I think this is something that this is what resilience is that we shift into this mindset that even when hard things are happening, even when scary things are happening, we are going to find that there is some area of power we have. That there is some step that we can take to make things slightly better for ourselves. Whether that just be acknowledging and accepting our emotions and having compassion for ourselves instead of blaming and shaming and guilting ourselves, or instead of denying how we're feeling. Whether that be learning how to come into acceptance of the hard thing and how we're feeling about it. And again, just being on our own side. And then looking for our steps, right? This is something that I have been through many, many times in my life. Just being chronically ill, facing chronic setbacks in my life because I didn't have support and I was constantly being told that everything I was doing was wrong and I was evil and I was off track, and not having support and things falling through. Right? I've been through that a lot in my life. You're making progress and then the body flares up and everything's awful. You learn how to say, okay, I'm going to let myself be upset. I'm going to process that. And then I'm just going to look for where my power is. What little step can I take to move forward? I'm not going to let this completely take me down and make me feel like I have absolutely no control. There are lots of things that have happened to me that have been totally outside of my control, that have been very, very painful, that have affected my life in a big way. But again, our mindsets are very important with that. We can train ourselves to be people who look for solutions instead of look for problems, who look for the power we have instead of saying this hard thing happened and therefore I have no power. We can develop that kind of resilient mindset. And then we can go out into the world and we can be those kind of people for other people. Is that we first learn how to validate people and just support them and be there with them in the hard thing at first. And then when and if they are ready, which doesn't always happen, but when and if they want to, or if they do, we can become the kind of people that say, okay, I'm here to support you in taking whatever your next steps are. That whatever that looks like, I can help you figure it out. I have resources I can provide. I have support I can provide. We can brainstorm together. That's how we work on that individually, right? And then collectively, again, we want to start to understand that the more we develop empathy as a collective, the more we are going to shift our systems. And the people who are in power don't want that. That is why they are teaching the message of hyper-individualism and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and everyone's experiencing the life that they deserve, and we're allowed to exploit people because they're bad, wrong, and evil. Because if we were to develop empathy and compassion, if we were to actually see why people end up where they end up, so much of the time we are going to be able to see they had a very good reason for why they ended up there. And rehabilitation is the answer. And redistribution of wealth and access and resource is the answer. And humanizing these people and recognizing that they are just responding to not having their needs met is the answer. So this can literally look like buying less stuff, being less consumptive, just contributing less to these corporations. It can look like volunteer. It can look like donation. It can look like just actively being the kind of person who is redistributing power, wealth, and access on purpose. Because we start to recognize and realize that every human being deserves a chance. And that so much of the time, the people who are successful versus the people who aren't, it's not because the successful people are just inherently better people. It's because they were helped and supported in ways that the unsuccessful were not. Okay, so not having empathy is how we keep the world the way that it is. It's how we keep ourselves in a state of fear. It's how we keep ourselves in a state where we are harming ourselves, where we can't have good relationships with one another, where we are in support of, usually unconsciously, systems that are designed to harm. It's not going to work for us. It's not working for us. And then that's not even to mention how much it impacts the earth and the planet and the way that we dissociate from our connection to everything. And then the last thing I want to say is this lack of empathy can lead to a situation where we are in a constant state of navel gazing. Right? This lack of empathy leads to this state where we are hyper self-obsessed without having any kind of real self-awareness. And I talk about this all the time, that our culture is at once the most hyper self-focused culture ever. We are so concerned with how we look and how we appear and our status and what people think about us and da-da-da-da-da, while also having like the least amount of self-awareness ever. We don't actually know ourselves. We don't know what we like. We don't know what we're passionate about. We don't have any connection to what actually matters to us or our values or what is truly authentic to us versus what was conditioned and programmed into us. And we feel chronically disconnected from each other, from the earth, and from spirituality. Because all of this ties together. So if you are someone out there who feels like you're not connected to spirituality, like you can't find your connection to higher love or higher wisdom or higher guidance, it's likely because you have been trained to be against yourself, to be living this life where you are trying to be what other people want you to be, where you are so focused on being approved of that you can't actually connect to who you are and what you are and what matters to you. And therefore you can't be connected to your spirituality because they are one and the same thing. We connect to our spirituality through our authentic selves, through our authentic expression, through learning to accept who and what we are. And that's why we do, right, in this work, all the parts work, and learning to love and accept all of these parts of ourselves that we have historically believed I have to get rid of that or change that or fix that in order to be good enough. We learn to see these parts as good, as parts of ourselves, as parts that are helping us. We integrate them into ourselves, and we notice the more we do that, the more we have compassion for ourselves, the more we start to feel connected to everything else. The more we integrate our own emotions, the more we can connect with other people and their emotions. The more we empathize with ourselves, the more we can connect to others on a real level. The more we can feel the love of God. That these things all connect to each other, right? So again, having a culture of people who are deeply disconnected from their empathy equals a culture of people who are also disconnected from their guidance system, from their emotions, from their values, from their humanity. And therefore, they can be convinced to live lives and to pursue things that harm them. And they don't know any better because they're cut off from their guidance. So many of us, again, right, we're being raised in this world where we see mental illness and stress and anxiety and depression as something wrong with the person. Instead of being able to say, that's a response to our unhealthy culture. It's like an allergic reaction for a lot of us. I'm not saying every time. I'm not saying every case of depression is this or every case of mental illness is that. But so much of it, there are many, 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 many cases where the reason we struggle so much is not because we are broken, but because we are reacting and responding to a broken system. But this broken system that has no empathy says you should be able to just sacrifice yourself to the system and have no meaningful connection and be in a state of constantly trying to fix your face so that everyone will think that you're beautiful and be good and happy and satisfied. That you should be able to seek wealth and luxury at all costs, and that should make you happy. And then when it doesn't, there's something wrong with you. This is what we need to start to recognize. Lack of empathy is leading to all of these things. Lack of empathy is leading to all of these problems. It is not the solution to our problem. It is the cause of our problems. So like I said, the actual answer is to learn healthy empathy. Healthy empathy for ourselves, healthy empathy for others, healthy acceptance of the existential realities of life and how we don't have perfect control. And that the answer to a lot of this is community support. It's not isolating ourselves even further, trying to perfect ourselves, trying to deny this stuff. The thing that takes adverse experiences from being an adverse experience that we grow through to an adverse experience that traumatizes us forever is, generally speaking, the amount of support we feel like we have going through it. So how can you be the kind of person that is a support for those going through hard things? And that's why I do this work, right? Because so many of the hard things that I've been through, I went through alone. It was awful. I had to resource myself. I had to deeply tap into my spirituality because that was the only thing that got me through. Because there wasn't a soul on the earth who was able to hold me or validate me or help me. And I never want anyone else to have to go through that. Empathy is the answer, it is not the cancer. Okay? So that's what I wanted to say today. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'll take those. But this narrative that empathy is negative or it's a weakness could not be farther from the truth. It is what is going to heal us. And it is going to cause a breakdown. It's going to cause a breakdown of our society. It's going to cause a breakdown of our structures. And the people who are benefiting from what we have right now through their lack of empathy are not going to like it. And so there's a major push against it. And it's been that way for a long time. But we can't be taken down by that. If your spiritual work is making you navel gaze, it's not spiritual work. If it's not helping you to be more in the world, to be more in alignment with your values, to be more aware of what's going on out there and how you can contribute to something better, it's not spirituality. If we're living lives to try to be liked, we're missing the point. That's why we do this work. That's why we do the self-love path. The self-love path is the way to reconnect with our healthy empathy so that we can be people who are shifting the needle on how culture works in a healthy direction. Okay? Okay. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that was clarifying on some level. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. And I will see you next week, probably. All right? Talk to you later.